RF returned to sender. Taylor awoke in a cold sweat late that night. He was laying in a muddy pit in no man's land and could only assume he had been there for the better part of 4 hours now. The attack had clearly failed, and he was lucky enough to find that he wasn't dead, but was unlucky enough to find himself still in the field rather than in his own trench with his own countrymen. Weakly, Taylor crawled over to a puddle in the ground and looked at himself. His grizzled and dirty face was unremarkable besides the bump that had now taken form on his balding head. "I guess it was just a scratch then," he said to himself. He then crawled further out of the hole and peered across no man's land. To the east of him were the Ticonderogan positions, where if he was caught there he would be killed. To the west were the blue-coated Ulstermen who would no doubt chew him out for cowardice. But be thankful someone made it back alive from the near-suicidal assault on the enemy positions. It was a full moon tonight, and the moonlight shined upon the battlefield and revealed the corpses strewn about as evidence of the failed assault. Taylor was more than upset at the sight of his dead countrymen laying there black like a sack of rags, and it made him upset. But now was not the time for tears, as he knew if he stayed out here any longer than he already had, a sniper bullet would pierce his heart where an artillery shell fragment had already failed to kill him earlier in the day. He then crawled out of the hole and onto the ground that was soft from the recent rain. Taylor wasn't the best with directions, especially with a piercing headache interfering with his thinking. But he didn't know his east from west, and so west he went to home. He crawled rather slowly at first. He figured perhaps if he moved slowly enough a sentry in the Ticonderogan line would figure him for some innocent beast lost in the field and wouldn't shoot at him. However, he was quickly proven wrong when a bullet struck the body next to him and he slid headfirst into a shell hole and into a puddle. He then crawled out of it and began to breathe heavily and was shocked by his second close encounter with death. He had never seen a Ticonderogan before with his own eyes, but knew they were brilliant marksmen, so he would not receive another warning shot. He then rose up and peered his head towards the trench line ahead. He was only about 10 yards away from it now. So close yet so far, he thought. He then unbuttoned his navy blue coat. It would be the fastest run of his life and he didn't want sweat to get in the way. He then looked back to the other trench line and couldn't find the marksman in sight. Then again, that was the whole point of him being a marksman. He then turned back to his own trench line, said a small prayer and began to sprint. Across bodies, shell craters, and messes of horses and barbed wire he ran. At first he felt as if the marksman had not spotted him yet, until a bullet zipped past his head which only made Taylor run faster. Across the field, men in the trenches began to yell in amazement that their comrade escaped death and was now running towards them, and they shouted incoherent words. "I wager I'll be getting some kind of medal for this," Taylor said to himself. He now was only 2 yards away when he felt a sharp pain in his leg and fell face first into the mud. He had been shot, but it would not keep him down. He then rose where he fell and continued to run, albeit with a slight limp now. After a final shot from the marksman hit a sandbag, he landed in the trench and the men shouted and cheered for him, and a smile stretched across Taylor's face as he felt he was now safe from the horrors of war, or so he thought. The cheers now died away as Taylor stood face to face with the men who lived in the trench. Their faces were unfamiliar to him and his words were unfamiliar to them. These were not Ulstermen at all. They were Ticonderogan. He had ran straight to the enemy trench line, and what happened next was anyone's guess.